With a level-up system from God, Hunter becomes the strongest player. The anime begins 3 years earlier than the current day, where the army is attacking an island, but the fighters realize that their weapons are ineffective against the forces they are facing. Therefore, they must leave it to the hunters because it is the only alternative. Inside the island, a troop of hunters forms up to deal with an approaching swarm of ants. At the moment the insects attack, the regiment captain encourages his troops to hold off the enemies as much as possible, or else the vanguard will be vulnerable. Despite their efforts, the hunter's rank was too low, and they ended up becoming easy prey for the giant insects. The captain is eaten alive while feeling his life fading before his eyes until another hunter eliminates the ant with his club and heals the fighter. However, another group of ants attacks the healer, but another member of the hunter team appears and, seeing Byung in danger, electrocutes the enemies from a distance. The last member of the team, Yunho, uses his devastating physical strength to secure the front line, while the healer finishes his work with the wounded in the field. Impressed by all that talent, the defeated squadron watches as the S-rank hunters resolve the situation. Unsuk, the member with electric claws, asks his healer not to rush ahead, but Byung just wanted to help as many people as he could. Besides, he was sure his two friends would come to protect him. At that moment, a gigantic ant appears on the battlefield, but despite its size and intimidating appearance, the S-rank team advances against the opponent. While Yunho holds the ant by its jaws, Unsuk injures it with his electricity. Then Yunho tears off the insect's jaws with his own hands and hurls one of the ant's claws at it with absurd force, piercing the giant's body. But several other identical ants appear, and Yunho activates an ability that makes him even more powerful, while Unsuk unleashes tremendous lightning on the battlefield. The amount of power is so great that it can be seen from the other side of the island, where the commander of another troop realizes that the S-rank has arrived in time. Nevertheless, Master Choi had his own battle to win, and when the enemy horde approaches, the leader burns all the weaker ants and orders his troops to advance against the rest of them. In the meantime, the context of the situation is explained. Over 10 years ago, a series of portals appeared connecting our world to an alternate dimension. The other side of each portal was filled with bizarre creatures called magic monsters. Those who awaken abilities to face these monsters, which are immune to conventional weapons, are called hunters. Based on their natural power, they are classified in descending order as S, A, B, C, D, or E rank. However, once this power awakens, it cannot be increased through any individual effort. 3 years later, a portal has a whole structure to serve the purposes of the hunters, while a group of lower-class hunters gathers around to pass the time and prepare for excursions into dungeons. At this moment, a food truck attendant gives coffee to one of them and wishes him good luck on the raid. One of his friends, Park, arrives at this moment and greets Kim. Kim is surprised by his friend's arrival since he had said he was tired of hunting, but the man responds that his wife is pregnant with their second child, so he needs to earn money from raids because diapers aren't free. And at that moment, the protagonist arrives and all the hunters are messing with the guy, greeting him or making some joke. Since he drew attention upon arrival, Park asks if the guy is so strong that everyone wants to talk to him. However, Kim claims it's the opposite. As the boy is known as the weakest hunter of humanity, people kind of adopted him as a mascot, so he is well known. Once he ended up in the hospital after participating in an E-rank mission. At least when he is called, everyone already knows that the raid will be easy. And as sun approaches, the two hunters try to lower their voices so the guy doesn't hear, but he had already heard everything, resigned to not being able to argue against facts. Right in front of him, his friend Joki shows concern for Jinwoo Sung being hurt once again and insists on knowing the origin of the wound, even though the guy avoids talking about it. Then he comments on the case known among the hunters, the famous E-rank portal raid, where Jinwoo was the only one injured and went straight to the hospital. Since all the other hunters were of higher rank, no one saw the need to bring a healer, so it fell to the young man who ended up lagging behind. Betrayee argues that they were selfish and didn't think about the group's needs, but Jinwoo takes responsibility, saying it's his fault for being weak, and that he's already used to being treated that way. The raid is about to begin, and one of the hunters volunteers to be the group leader. Since everyone around recognizes that Song Cheol is the most skilled of all, there was no objection. Soon, the team enters the portal, and before Sung enters, Kim asks him to stay behind the rest of the group and be careful not to get hurt. Joey tries to motivate the boy and also enters, while he stays behind and observes his knife with almost no magical power, which was the only thing he managed to buy. Still, it's better than nothing, so Jinwoo Sung promises to do his best this time. Far away, the president of the Hunter Association, Go Gunhee, talks to his assistant, reporting that the conversation with the government was the same as always. They accuse dungeon breaks of being a problem, but still want the resources that hunters collect from them. Go doesn't mind them wanting a piece of the pie, but he wishes there wasn't so much hypocrisy in it. After all, dungeons are the livelihood of hunters. They live off what they sell from these dungeons, and the most valuable example of this is the stones collected from defeated monsters, essence stones. And finally, Jinwoo achieved his first victory after putting in a lot of effort for it. Despite that, another creature emerged, attacking him. No matter how hard he tried to confront it, when attempting to thrust his knife into the enemy, his weapon was completely shattered. In return, the monster drove a sword into the boy's abdomen. Park arrived at that moment and eliminated the enemy, but he soon had to return to the front lines and Sung was bleeding heavily. So Juri took charge of healing her friend. While receiving treatment, Sung observed the fight of his companions. His vision grew blurrier as he wished he could be there in the battle. Returning to the president, he explained that the most expensive essence stones are collected from the strongest monsters. These stones can be transformed into powerful weapons and equipment to fight against other monsters. In addition to these stones, mana crystals serve the same purpose but are less potent. The assistant then asked if the government had another intention in using these items. Go explained that their intention was to use the materials as a source of energy, as it is a cheaper and more efficient form of energy than current ones, and it also pollutes the environment less. This is why there is so much pressure on the hunters. The cleanest and most effective energy source comes only from resources extracted from dungeons. In Sung's mission, the team finally defeated the dungeon boss. Seeing everyone celebrating the victory, Joey asked her friend if he continues trying to be a hunter out of stubbornness. After all, if he continues like this, something more serious could happen at any moment. Today, for example, the injury was not just in the abdomen, but throughout the body. Sung apologized for the trouble, but Joey scolded him, saying she doesn't want apologies, she's just worried about him. Meanwhile, other hunters were collecting loot, but this dungeon didn't have many mana crystals. Everyone was worried about the payment they would receive from selling the items. Sung at least only had the rank E essence stone that he obtained almost at the cost of his life. During this time, the hunter discovered a tunnel inside the dungeon, indicating it was a double dungeon, a new opportunity to get quality loot. However, the squad leader was cautious and informed his subordinates that in extraordinary cases like this, the standard procedure is to await orders from the Hunter Association. Other members questioned this stance, fearing they would send other hunters who would take the remaining loot. Besides, the tunnel was still part of this rank D dungeon, so there shouldn't be a problem. Song Cheadle decided to take a vote on whether to enter the tunnel or not. It ended in a tie 6-6. However, some hadn't voted yet, so he was responsible for the tiebreaker. He considered that a D-rank dungeon was too dangerous for him, but since his father was missing, he was the sole provider for his family. So he had no choice. He needed to pay for his mother's treatment and his sister's college. After his reflection, he chose to dive in. In the moment when the weakest hunter seeks his breakthrough, Hunter Association is recruiting new members. Candidates line up to test their abilities, and an examiner evaluates each one's rank with a black sphere that citizens touch for scanning. A representative passes the results to Master Choi, informing him that a B rank and 2 C ranks join the guild. The chief emphasizes that gender and age don't matter. If a person has talent, they must receive a contract offer, even if they're not a Chaha. Meanwhile, in the most Brazilian street in the Anaheim, 2 guys on a motorcycle snatch a purse from a girl and speed away with the victim's belongings. Along the way, a woman in a pink cap stands in the middle of the street, making the thugs nervous. They continue accelerating and the woman jumps over them, surgically retrieving the purse. In the process, the motorcycle skids, and the woman returns the bag to the victim. The entire population witnesses this act of heroism and approaches Hunter Chaha, a renowned S-rank associate, for a photo. Before being photographed, she expresses annoyance at all the attention and leaves for some peace. Back in the dungeon, 40 minutes have passed since they entered the tunnel. Since the portal stays open for an hour after defeating the boss, they still have 20 minutes to get what they need and leave. Jinwoo Sung takes the opportunity to apologize again for putting them in this new predicament, as Joey voted against the new expedition. However, she gets irritated and reminds him that he would be dead if the sword strike had been a bit higher, so he should be more careful before entering places even more dangerous than those that nearly took his life for good. Jinwoo reflects on the scolding and acknowledges that having a B-rank healer by his side is a significant advantage. The girl asks to be rewarded with a dinner, and Jinwoo's reaction makes it seem like he'd prefer another sword in the stomach. Further ahead, the group reaches the boss's chamber. Even though the colossal gate looks intimidating, no one wants to leave empty-handed, so they decide to enter anyway, considering they've come this far. Before that, the president of the Hunter Association introduces himself to the newly awakened and warns that no one is obliged to become a hunter, but once they make that choice, they must remain vigilant at all times, no matter how powerful they may be. As a final piece of advice, he asks all candidates to fear because fear keeps the courageous alive. Thus, the expedition group enters the boss's room and finds several ancient statues. Among them, one holds inscriptions about the commandments of the Temple of Kartnan. The leader of the hunters steps forward and begins to read. First, worship God. Second, praise God. Third, prove your faith in God. As the leader recites each commandment, Joey notices that the largest statue moved its eyes and calls Jinwoo to look, but the protagonist believes it's just in her imagination. Finally, Song Cheol reads the last commandment, stating that those who do not follow these words will not leave alive. With that, the gate closes and everyone is in shock. A hunter revolts at being put in that situation and leaves the group attempting to escape. However, one of the statues comes to life and ends the man with its axe before he can try to open the gate. As she annihilated a D-rank hunter as if it were nothing, it makes no sense to have a monster of that level in this lower level dungeon. Regardless, there's no way out, so Sung begins to imagine what will become of him. And it was at that moment that the largest statue in the room turns its eyes toward the protagonist. Despite this, Junwoo Sung recalls that he has been close to death many times before. In the first instance, he separated from the group on a raid and ended up trapped. Next, he was attacked by E-rank monsters and spent weeks in the hospital. Furthermore, he almost died of hunger in a labyrinth. No matter how low the dungeon rank was for him, it was always a matter of life or death. Unlike more skilled hunters who can defeat strong monsters and obtain rare items, all he had was a useless knife, and since it broke, he'll have to fight empty-handed. For reasons like these, some learn that he should observe and wait for a good opportunity, as he is not capable of charging into a raid head-on. And it was this realization that kept him alive until today, even through hardships. Soon, he shouts for the entire group to duck, while the statue spews lava from its eyes, sweeping through a significant portion of the hunters. Looking around, everyone present is overcome by panic and helplessness as chaos unfolds in the eyes of each hunter trapped in that chamber, and Jinwoo Sung has no doubt that you won't leave there alive. All around, the hunters tried to seize the brief respite to plan some kind of countermove, but everything seemed too small in the face of the enormity of the enemy. In the meantime, Jinwoo Sung attempted to assist the unconscious Joey, incapacitated by the attack. Song Cheol expressed gratitude to the young boy for his insight, acknowledging that he had anticipated the attack, instructing everyone to take cover, thus saving some lives. Jinwoo observed their leader and noticed his arm had been torn off. The experienced leader bravely tried to keep the young man calm, reassuring him that clenching his teeth would make the pain bearable. However, they needed to stop the bleeding before things took a turn for the worse, so Jinwoo did his part and covered the wound with gauze. During this act, Cheol mentioned he would have asked for treatment for Jogi, but she didn't handle pressure well and usually participated only in easy raids despite being a B-rank healer. He shared that he had been in 2 B-rank raids himself and had no doubt that this enemy belonged to Class A, maybe even S. As for the temple commandments written on that plaque, they likely referred to a deity represented by the statue. Along with the portals, various supernatural phenomena began occurring in the world. Some of these phenomena affected the hunters, while monsters behind these portals accumulated unimaginable powers. Meanwhile, far away at a school, the protagonist's sister, Jana Sung, talked with a friend. The short-haired girl asked if Jina's brother was indeed a hunter. She confirmed it, mentioning he was an E-rank and usually came home bandaged from his missions. When asked about the interest, the girl evaded the question, whispering that she could surely do a better job than that E-rank hunter. Back in the dungeon, the leader argued that the enemy was too powerful to be destroyed, so they needed to stay calm, assess the situation, and find a safe way out. Despite the precaution, a team member rushed and refused to die there, having just signed a contract with a major guild. Trusting his speed, he assured he could cross the gate before being caught. However, before reaching halfway, the statue almost completely destroyed the speedster's body, leaving only his feet behind. Undoubtedly, this was the last evidence they needed to understand that this creature could annihilate them in the blink of an eye. The big question was why it hadn't eliminated them all yet, and perhaps the reason was a hint of an exit. Therefore, Jinwoo Sung used his wits and asked his leader to recall the first commandment of Kartnan, venerate God. Interpreting the phrase, Jinwoo Sung stood up in search of a solution. Despite Cheol's concern about the young man's unexpected reaction, something in his eyes indicated that he hadn't given up on life. Analyzing the commandment, the young man asked the rest of the group to bow before the statue, simulating the veneration that the god demanded. The hunters were confused and skeptical about the effectiveness of this measure, but with no better ideas at the moment, they all joined the plan. The veneration caused a movement in the statue, changing its face to a sinister expression. After a few tense seconds, the group began to question the next step. Park felt confident enough to stand up, believing the statue had stopped attacking. Following suit, the others stood up, but the tension was far from over because the giant statue then rose from its throne with that sinister expression and began to chase the guild. Although Song Cheol was the leader, the group pressured Jin Woo-sung to come up with the next step. Obviously, the answer would be in the second commandment, but the intense pressure on the young man prevented him from finding a way out. That's from a scholar of ethnology, the in-depth study of societies and their culture took responsibility. This reading reminded the hunter of some exaltations to the gods. Applying his knowledge to the statue, he knelt down and offered a kind of prayer. While the ethnologist prayed, the statue lifted its foot higher and higher until it stepped on him as if he were an insect. This triggered chaos and everyone began to run in pure desperation. Panic robbed a hunter of her reaction, and she too was mercilessly trampled. As he ran, Park remembered his family waiting at home with his second child about to be born. He tried to find a safer spot, but turning his back to another statue, it used its sword to cut Park in half. Meanwhile, Jinwoo was thinking of any possible clue to praise the cursed demon. So he observed his surroundings again and seeing the statues around him, noted that the first one held a spear, the second an axe, the next a hammer, followed by a sword, and then a trumpet. Intuitively, he predicted that the statues with musical instruments were peaceful. He instructed each member to run to one. But as he reached a statue with a drum, the instrument's music didn't play. Supposing that it would only work if only one person stayed with each statue, he left Jody in safety and moved on to the next. As the only target in the field, the god went after Sung, who sprinted to the last alternative. At the moment he would be crushed, he managed to jump and reach the statue he wanted. However, it was dark and he didn't see that the statue actually held a shield, not a musical instrument. It raised the weapon and struck the young hunter. Despite the brutal force of the impact, Jin Woo-sung survived and crawled towards the last instrument. Severely injured, he reached his destination just as the god stepped near his body. Nevertheless, the statue released its angelic voice, and with the praise of all the instruments playing together, the demon god sat back down. Joey chases after his friend, who is severely weakened. As if that's not enough, the statue's final stomp ends up taking the hunter's right leg. Jovi rushes to stop the bleeding, while she herself begins to bleed from all the openings on her face due to the difficulty of the wound. After the definitive end of the conflict, guild members exchange glances and assess the losses. Soon, they seek to find someone to blame for the tragedy that followed the vote to enter the tunnel. After all fingers are pointed, Song Cheol takes responsibility since he is the leader and in charge of the final word. Despite the heated discussion, the god raises his hand and the ground trembles, making the group think it's an earthquake. However, Jinwoo explains to the group that the statue was raising an altar in the center of the hall. As in many myths and cultures, gods demand sacrifices and offerings in their name. Following the third commandment, the next step is to prove your faith in God. In these moments, men need to distinguish themselves from boys, and Kim takes the first move, pointing his sword at Cheol, as he should bear the dishonor of failing in his leadership. Other members try to stop the action, but the leader himself surrenders to the sacrifice and goes to the altar. Their flames ignite around the ritual, but as nothing else happens, Jin Woo-sung asks for help to examine the altar closely. He spends some seconds trying to discern the next step, but with little success. Finally, he considers the possibility of someone coming to rescue them if they continue to wait. However, as the portal has been open for 7 days, the group fears that the statues may start moving again at any moment. After all, it takes a week for the portal to open completely. This process is called a dungeon break, and when it happens, monsters can cross over. In their case, if they fail, the demon god can enter the real world. Unaware of the ongoing events, Gina Sung visits her mother, undergoing painful treatment. Even with her unconscious, Gina updates her on recent matters, discusses her friends, and talks about the national exam results. Then, Jin Woo-sung calls the other members into the altar's circle, anticipating that they will need one person for each flame. Once done, blue fire surrounds the circle and the gate opens. However, the statues in the hall emit a strange glow and move toward the center, leaving the group uncertain about the next move. At this point, Jinwoo discovers that the statues stop moving when you keep your eyes on them. Therefore, everyone must keep their eyes on the enemies until they figure out an escape. However, one hunter panics and decides to run for her life, leaving everything behind. As she crosses the altar line, one of the flames extinguishes and the gate closes a bit. This opens the group's eyes to the intention of the third commandment, to test faith in God with an extreme situation like this. Regardless, this assumption doesn't confirm if they are facing a trap or not. Next, another member tries his luck and crosses the gate, repeating the process of extinguishing another flame and closing the gate a bit more. As he was the last support for the legless comrade, the protagonist falls to the ground. After this escape, Jin Woo-sung tells everyone not to leave because if they do, they will have a blind spot and won't be able to prevent the arrival of enemies. He assumes that the blue flames mark the time, so they can leave once they go out. Kim praises the boy's intelligence, especially since he has been labeled as useless since joining the association. However, Kim has a family waiting for him, so he doesn't want to die now. Therefore, Kim apologizes and flees the chamber. The three survivors now have a blind spot since they don't have enough eyes to cover all statue surroundings. In other words, they can no longer prevent the statues from approaching. Jinwoo starts to cry for coming so far and failing, despite surviving many challenges that tested him. But before the end, Song Cheol tells the two young ones to leave. According to him, it's evident that the gate will close after the penultimate survivor leaves. Since the two still have a long life ahead, they should go. He asks Jogi to take care of Sung, and as the healer prepares to take her companion away, her legs lock and she can't move them. The leader thinks she exerted herself too much to heal Sung, but some action needed to be taken as the siege was about to close in. For this reason, Jinwoo Sung tells Cheol to carry the healer outside. The leader starts to argue, but the protagonist insists loudly that he should take her immediately because there is no other alternative, considering he is without a leg. Jo panics and tries to convince her friend to change his mind, but his response is to give his magic stone to the girl, considering she had invited him to lunch earlier. With this, she could earn some money and buy a special lunch when Jinwoo returns. He promises to get the change from her. Even so, Jui continues to protest, but with no more time to spare, Song Cheol knocks out the young girl and carries her outside. And as soon as the two leave, Jinwoo Sung is alone with all those statues around him, without his leg to run, just waiting for his end, sitting and defenseless. Despite everything, he feels it should have been like this from the beginning. After all, he has always been the weakest hunter. If he knew it would be like this, he would have definitely taken out a higher life insurance policy. Finally, he raises the sword left by Kim and intends to take at least one enemy with him. At that moment, a statue throws its giant sword at the boy, but it sticks into the altar near him. Another statue hits the ground, causing Jinwoo to roll with the impact, leaving him completely exposed to the enormous enemies. With that, the next blow is accurate, tearing off one of the hunter's arms. Praying for his end, the boy remained on the ground with no reaction, just lamenting not having another chance to do things differently. Meanwhile, another statue crushed his body with its hammer, breaking his bones. At that moment, despite the pain, Jinwoo Sung is proud of having at least reached this point. As he tries to stand again, a colossal statue pierces his right shoulder completely, impaling the boy on the wall. Miraculously alive, he spends his final moments harboring hatred for hunters like Kim, despising the fact that he said he couldn't take it anymore and had to leave. After all, it's logical that nobody could endure being there anymore. He was just justifying his own selfishness. It's always the most selfish ones who benefit the most. Jinwoo has a terminally ill mother, but even so, he decided to sacrifice himself for the group, leaving her and his sister alone, only to end up being massacred in the most painful and lonely way possible. Next, the sword-piercing Jinwoo is lifted high, causing extreme pain to the hunter, who is then thrown from a height of 20 meters and falls backward onto the sacrificial altar. His blood flows rapidly from his body as he cries and changes his mind. Now he feels that he doesn't want to die anymore, but it's too late. One of the statues then delivers the coup de grace to the protagonist, extinguishing the last blue flame. Following this, a screen opens with a notification about a secret mission called Courage of the Weak. This notification alerts someone that they have acquired the necessary qualifications to be a player, and then asks if they accept. Once the proposal is confirmed, another screen opens, warning that this person's heart will stop in 0.02 seconds if they don't accept, and then other options between yes and no are presented on the screen. In the end, the player goes ahead and accepts again. Suddenly, Jinwoo Sung wakes up in a hospital bed. Desperate, he looks over his entire body, recalling the limbs that were crushed by the giant statues. However, his body was intact with all his arms and legs, and there was no sign of the chest puncture. At this moment, two men enter the room, and one of them introduces himself as Woo Jinchul, the administrator of the surveillance team of the Hunter Association. Beside him is an assistant named Kang Tashik. First and foremost, Jinwoo Sung wants to know what surveillance wants with him. Woo informs him that the boy was unconscious for 3 days. As for his mission companions, Song Cheol lost an arm and probably won't be able to work as a hunter anymore. Lee Jo-hee, on the other hand, is traumatized and receiving psychiatric treatment. Due to her condition, the administrator is unsure if she will continue in the profession. Considering that only 6 hunters survived this dungeon, and everyone knows it's a very dangerous job. Despite the tragic outcomes, Woo mentions that such incidents are rare. Now regarding why they are there, when the White Tiger Guild arrived at the location after being informed by the survivors, they only found Jinwoo Sung lying on the ground, with no trace of the statues or the temple described by the survivors. However, since there was no inconsistency in the report and the remains of the deceased were at the scene, Jinwoo's group was removed from the list of suspects. By the way, the administrator asks if the boy had his second awakening. The awakening determines a hunter's power and it's supposed to be unchangeable. However, in rare cases, a hunter can undergo a second awakening. This bypasses the rule of immutable power and can elevate a hunter to rank A or even S. To measure the protagonist's new strength, a manometer is brought to him. Since he survived instant death level monsters, it's highly likely they are facing a new prodigy. After Jinwoo places his hand on the device, the screen displays the number 10. He was excited to discover his new rank and insists that the surveillance team reveal the result quickly. However, Woo Jinchul informs him that he misunderstood and apologizes to the young man. Outside, Kang Tashik seems frustrated with the test result. Even E-rank hunters can reach up to 70 points on the meter, so it's as if Jinwoo Sung is just a civilian based on his score. While Kang expresses his dissatisfaction, Woo Jinchul thinks that the dungeon has disappeared, and there's no way to explore it again to figure out how that boy survived. Back to the young man, he laments not getting a good score as he was hoping to level up. But above all, Jinwoo is confused that no one asked about the strange interface that looks like a video game, indicating that he had an unread message. This makes him think that only he can see this thing. He tries to touch the interface, but realizes it's not a touchscreen. The more he concentrates on it, the more some memories come back to him, like when he was about to die and this same screen appeared, saying he met the conditions to be a player and asking if he wanted to enter a mission called Courage of the Weak. Next, his sister appears in the hospital scolding him for not taking care of himself again. Almost every mission he comes back unharmed, but he remains a punching bag. However, as it was a genuine concern, Jinwoo smiles slightly at Gina's scolding. This leads her to think she's being sarcastic, so she threatens to quit studying and get a job if he continues to get injured, as one day, he'll end up crippled and unemployed. Acknowledging his sister's point, Jinwoo agrees to take it easy and then asks if Gina can see the strange interface in front of him. She thinks a doctor needs to examine his head but plays along. As a gamer, Jinwoo explains that this interface looks like a virtual game, asking what to do when an unread message notification appears in a game. Gina explains that normally you just open the message box. As the boy repeats his sister's words, the voice command shows the messages. The first one informs him that he has become a player, and the other says that the daily mission called Strength Training has arrived. Jinwoo tries to remember where he heard the word player, while Gina sees that her brother is fine and says goodbye. Outside, she meets her friend Song again, who believes she is more useful than Jinwoo as a hunter. Meanwhile, the boy delves deeper into the virtual menu, discovering that it is designed to assist in the player's development and not fulfilling the system's determination can result in a penalty. Finally, a third screen indicates that the rewards have already been delivered to him. He still doesn't understand what's going on, so he goes into the details of the strength training mission to take a look. The daily goal was to perform 100 push-ups, 100 squats, 100 sit-ups, and run 10 kilometers. If the player doesn't complete this mission, they will suffer a penalty. Jinwoo Sung thinks it's just a joke and tries to figure out how he could possibly do all that in his current state. But while lying down and not taking it seriously, a countdown in the menu is running out. In the meantime, the surveillance team administrator informs President Go that the young hunter, Jinwoo Sung, did not have a second awakening. Over the phone, Go is relieved that at least this case didn't cause a dungeon break, but there's still something fishy about this story. Therefore, the boss instructs surveillance to leave this dungeon in the database for further evaluation. Meanwhile, Master Choi invites Cha-ha to be instructor for the upcoming B-rank raid because it will be an important expedition to select new recruits for the institution. However, Cha-ha doesn't feel very confident in her mentoring skills, so Choi explains that all she needs to do is fight normally as she always does, and her performance will serve as an example for the less experienced. After that, he explains that the Hunter Guild is one of the country's top 5 guilds, but on an international level, they are still small. And although individual levels cannot be evolved, collective training will always be a differentiator, especially now that they are preparing for a very special moment. Later, a portal opens in the middle of a road and civilians wonder when the hunters will arrive to solve this problem. Meanwhile, Jinwoo, who was in the middle of his sleep, receives a mission failure message, and as a penalty, an earthquake shakes his room and the boy is teleported to an unknown place. Without understanding what happened, he encounters a giant desert centipede, while the panel reappears, stating that it's a punitive survival mission and the goal is to stay alive for 4 hours. Meanwhile, nurses realize that one of the patients is missing, and even after 2 hours of him fleeing from a monstrous insect, the staff is clueless and doesn't know where to look for Jinwoo. Thus, the boy remains trapped in that alternate world until the countdown ends, and just as the creature is about to strike, time runs out and the desperate boy returns directly to the hospital, receiving the news that he completed the mission and a reward has been granted to him. However, before he can retrieve the item, nurses enter his room and start assisting him. The next day, Jaina is on the phone with her brother and asks him to cover for her at Cheadle, since Jinwoo has caused her so much trouble again. In the meantime, Joey is summoned for a ranked D raid, and despite the association knowing that she's going through a tough time, the rest of the guild is busy, so she's the only option at the moment. Despite this, Joey declines the proposal, but at least learns that Jinwoo has significantly improved his condition. Happy with the news, she goes straight to visit her friend, but instead of continuing to rest, he is running around the hospital courtyard like crazy. Nurses comment that hunters recover faster than normal people, but what this boy is doing is unbelievable. Finally taking his daily missions seriously, Jinwoo Sung discovers that each time he completes them, he receives 3 rewards. The first is total recovery, where all his exhaustion disappears. Second, some points to distribute among his attributes, and as always, he pays more attention to strength. In addition, there's even a skills and inventory screen, making his life really look like a game. And at this moment, as he reflects on his new path and navigates his imaginary menu, all the patients look at him as if the boy is from another world. Finally, the third reward is a random loot box. In this case, the item is a strange key. Until now, he had only obtained useless things like bandages or pens, so it seems that luck has finally arrived. According to the item description, Jinwoo Sung could use this key to teleport to an instance dungeon. The way to use this item is by reaching exit 3 of the Hapjeong subway station. However, Jinwoo has no idea what an instance dungeon is, but it seems like some mission for him to evolve his strength, or at least he hopes so. And during these reflections, the image of that giant macabre statue invades the protagonist's mind, causing physical pain as well. In the meantime, local newspapers report that several Rank D portals have opened around the country, and Rank C portals in the Upper and Central East are being resolved at this very moment. The Rank B portal that appeared in the port area has a raid scheduled in a few days by the Hunter Association. Jinwoo Sung takes advantage of his improvement to visit his mother, and her image lying like that reminds the boy of a scene from 4 years ago, when he held her in his arms after finding her unconscious. As soon as he takes the woman to the doctor, he and his sister discover that the mother has the eternal sleep disease, also known as final rest. It is a disease that emerged with the appearance of portals and affects approximately 1 in every 10,000 people. There are theories that it is caused by frequent exposure to mana, but regardless, the best that current medicine can offer to those with this disease is support, keeping the person alive, but with no chance of recovery. So knowing that he will have to take care of his comatose mother for the rest of her existence, Jinwoo Sung endured the most arduous and humiliating tasks until he was accepted by the Hunter Association and had a salary that provided access to proper treatment for his mother. But soon he discovers that this profession is far from easy, and in the first few days he already realizes this, falling behind in most raids and getting injured frequently. In one of these expeditions, Jinwoo is kicked out of the group for not being able to help, and when the rest of the team makes it clear that even though they ordered him to leave, he won't receive payment since he didn't contribute. Worst of all, Jinwoo turned to them and apologized for being useless, on top of it all. Probably, this memory is the greatest incentive for him to focus so much on strength attribute points. Next, he embarks on his first solo mission, and upon reaching exit 3 of the Hapjeong subway station, he opens a lock that formed in front of him, and a portal opens. Upon crossing, he receives a message notifying him that he has entered the instance dungeon. The entrance behind him closes, but people around him continue to cross as if nothing is happening. With this, Jinwoo realizes that instance dungeons place him in a different dimension, just like red portals. Then he receives another message saying that he cannot leave until he kills the boss or uses a teleportation stone. Thus, he descends the stairs and comes face to face with 3 goblins. Images of him being gravely wounded by a creature of this race come back to him instantly, but this time he has no choice. No one there can help, and there is no easy way out of this dungeon. For this reason, he faces the enemies head-on, defending against their attacks until finding an opening for an offensive move, and on the first try, he slashes through a monster with his sword. Then he pierces the second goblin and also eliminates the last one. Thus, even though he is exhausted, he notices that he is indeed stronger. But now he really has to put it to the test as a lichen with a metal jaw enters the fray and destroys his knife. Jinwoo Sung's legs start to tremble, and sensing the fear, the lichen attacks again, slashing a cut on the hunter's face. After that, the wolf turns back to the target and advances again, each time closer to victory. Next week, we'll have more of this anime as soon as the new episode is released, so go ahead and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the like button below to support this video. See you guys.